Welcome, everyone. Dan, you might want to hit mute. Looks like we got that back.
All right.
Yeah, we did. So just remember you're off, and we'll get you in there. So, welcome, everyone. We're looking forward to a session, a lively group here for sales management actions to prepare for a stellar 2015. We've got people literally from all over North America with us today, and we're going to jump right in. What I'd ask each of you as we have them introduce themselves is to tell us, obviously, your name, your company, and also maybe what the temperature is and how much snowfall you have on the ground wherever you might be located. So with that, we're going to start. Let's start with Tibor. Tibor, why don't you kick us off and tell us all that good stuff?
Sure. So I'm up in Thornhill, which is the immediate suburb north of Toronto, and the temperature is roughly about 42, 43 Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius. No snow on the ground. So from that perspective, we're all good. Yes, and my name is Tibor Shanto. I'm with a company here called Renbor Sales Solutions. And in a nutshell, I work with B2B companies focused on new business acquisition, either how they go deeper and wider within an existing account, or how do they go after brand new logos. And the focus is on execution, because in sales, everything else is just talk.
There we go. Thanks, Tibor. Glad to have you with us. Let's go to Stephen. You're also up in the cold winter.
I am. Actually, I'm in Toronto, but I'm factually north of my good friend Tibor. I'm Stephen Rosen. I'm founder and president of Star Results. We focus on sales leadership development and a variety of areas within that, one being coaching, business planning, performance management, hiring sales superstars, and really work very closely with our clients. And all I can say is it's damn cold here.
Lori, how about you?
Hi, Miles and everyone. This is Lori Richardson. I'm in the Boston area, and it's actually 55 degrees, so pretty nice here until that polar vortex hits us, which I think is heading our way. I'm with Score More Sales. I work with Midmarket, mostly technology companies, and happy to be here.
Fantastic, Lori. Glad to have you. Lee, how about you?
Well, I'm in Minneapolis, stressed for the weather. We've got about 10 inches of snow on the ground. It's about 15 degrees, so I think I can take this off. It's not so bad in my office.
It looked like a Canadian toque.
Like I said, I'm Lee Salz, sales management strategist. Wrote the book Higher Right, Higher Profits, and delighted to be with you here today.
Excellent. I love the humor, man. I tell you what, I hope we can have more of that as we go along. Dan, don't forget mute and let us know about you.
Sure, I'm Dan Enthoven. I'm Vice President of Marketing at Enkata. Enkata is a company that uses predictive analytics and data intelligence to help sales organizations build better pipelines and close more deals. We are based in sunny California, and I kid you not, I was driving around with the top down in the convertible yesterday in shorts and a t-shirt. It is beautiful here, and I feel bad for y'all, but we are in the middle of an unbelievable drought, so I'm sure we would love worse weather than we're getting.
Oh, I tell you, talk about rubbing salt in the wound, my friend. I love it.
That really hurt.
Absolutely. So send pictures, Dan. Again, thanks to all of you. As you know, gang, all the audience has probably picked up. We've really got a stellar cast today. And I get the privilege of trying to moderate this group. I know many of them for years, actually all of them for years at this point, and I know I've got my hands full trying to keep this group on course, but I'm looking forward to it as well. And honestly, to sit back and take some notes myself because of the wisdom and the experience that these folks are all going to bring to the table. My name is Miles Austin. I'm the president of Fill the Funnel, and I write about, speak about, and train companies and sales leaders how to use sales tools in their business on a day-to-day practical basis. So that's what I do. I am excited to be working with Dan and the team at Enkata. This is the fourth in this series, and we've had some really great sessions, and I know this is going to add a new layer. We knew this audience would probably be a little bit different, only because we've really focused this conversation and this topic on sales leaders and on sales managers. So with that in mind, understand, we hope that there's salespeople on as well, either for your own benefit or maybe for your own career and future planning as well. We want to get started, and let's just jump in. By the way, for all of you, make sure that you'll note we have questions available. I'll be monitoring questions and looking off to the side to capture the questions from you in the audience. So don't hesitate. Type in your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. And let's start off. Stephen, I'm going to go to you first as we start this conversation and just ask you the question, how important is business planning in terms of ensuring success in your organization?
Well, Miles, you know what? I don't think there's any sales leaders that are on the line that plan to fail, but many of them fail to plan. And planning is really a key component of kicking off any year. We're talking about being prepared to start 2015. My approach when I was head of sales was that my whole team was ready to go January 3rd or 2nd, whatever day they started after the new year. So planning is really a critical task, one to target key accounts, to focus where your biggest opportunities are, and really, you know, in terms of timing and being prepared, you know, companies that are doing it in January or February are missing the boat, because your best sales are the ones that come early in the year, especially if they're supply agreements or ongoing contracts. You're going to make more money by capturing the early bird. So really, planning is an essential task to kick off and to know where you're going, and really doing some critical business thinking to ensure your success.
You know, and if I can jump in, I think the one thing I would add to Steve's comments and build out on them is that with a lot of companies that I see, they look at planning as being an event, you know, something you do at the beginning of the year, much like Steve just described. But I find the ones who execute the plans best really look at planning as an ongoing process. So yes, you have that big annual plan, but that planning continues down to, at the best companies I've worked with, to a daily exercise as opposed to an annual or semi-annual event.
Good point.
Absolutely. Anyone else have some thoughts on that one? As I just spilled water all over my desk.
Well, you're very great.
You didn't get the coffee?
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to talk about at some point. Maybe it's another discussion, but you know, planning is kind of like the term marketing. You know, there's a lot to it, and so the down and dirty of what a minimum is that a sales leader should be thinking about could be a good conversation at some point.
Well, and there's another part of this. When you talk about business planning that I find often gets missed is business planning also translates to putting quotas together. But there isn't always a reality check in putting together models that show how that quota is going to be achieved as a team and also at the individual level. So if you're going to hand a salesperson a quota, let's say you're going to give them a quota of $1 million in new business next year, my opinion is that sales managers have an obligation to show those salespeople how that $1 million is attained.
Well, Lee, I actually turn it around the other way, and you know, as head of sales, you certainly want to have a plan, but I think planning down to the individual level and the rep coming to the table and saying, how am I going to achieve my quota? What are my plans? What are my accounts? So maybe it's actually the two meshing together.
Yeah, and what I ran into with that is that, again, because companies can be so arbitrary and they just pull a number out of thin air, and I'm being polite as I describe it, and then they tell the salesperson, now you go figure out how to come up with that number, and it's completely illogical. They just made up a number and there's no way to get there. I had a client years ago where the owner came up with a number for one of the vertical markets, and after doing some analysis, I came back to him and I said, I got two choices for you. Either add more headcount or back off the number because you can't have both. Because it was physically impossible to have the number of meetings that hitting that number required in a certain time frame, which is physically impossible. And his reaction was, oh my goodness, I've been doing it this way for so many years, no wonder why we never hit the number. They didn't apply logic to it. So that's the challenge that, you know, and again, if there's no logic to how they come up with the number, asking that salesperson to figure it out is flawed.
Fair enough.
Maybe that's why the tenure of a sales leader is so short.
Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you guys, I help companies build business plans and the business planning processes, as well as quarterly review. And if you're to break down 3 simple steps in a business plan, how we break them down is: who are your most important customers that are going to drive your sales this year? How much resources are you going to apply against each one? And how are you going to make it happen with each of those? And if we get sales reps, because really the business planning process or sales planning, it's really a thinking process that we want to do, because once we get rolling in a year, time to think is just lost, right? And we're busy executing. So, really, if we talk about this time, it's a timely seminar, Miles, and it's really, if it's not done by the second to last week in December, then you're starting off the year shorthanded.
Yeah, no question, gang. And I think everyone would agree. Look, we all understand. Okay, we got to do this planning, but in your experiences, and I know there's different size of sales teams you lead, etc. But what kind of time frame does it take? Is this a 2-week intense project, or is there more involved? And whoever wants to jump on that one first, we can do that.
I think that there are going to be sort of spikes and then evens out. I think there will be some parts of the year where it is an intensive process. Start of the year, cycles around your product or offering and so on. But I think just because you go through that intense period doesn't mean that you stop planning. The markets change, circumstances change. We've all lived through periods less than 12 months where things change dramatically. We only have to think back to 2008. And you had to respond to that in the marketplace. So I think there will be those intense periods, like Steve said, where you want to look at who are your most likely accounts, who's likely to fall off the map, how you're going to replace that. But I tend to think that you need to build planning into your execution on an almost daily or weekly basis, down to the tactical level on a daily basis. If you're going to go out and prospect for new things, I tend to encourage people to try and combine their calendars and their pipelines to see. As Lee said, sometimes it's just physically impossible to get to certain things. So I think, again, to answer your question, there will be those peaks, whether it's quarterly, annually. If you're a public company, certainly the end of the quarter is an area where you do review and look ahead, but it's also ongoing.
And if you think of it like a living, breathing document, I think it's not an event, just like was said. It's going to morph and change as you go along.
I think it's also a way to actually get value out of your CRM. I think a lot of sales, we'll call from the frontline manager down, miss the opportunity to use the CRM as something that keeps, as Laurie says, that plan alive. Even if it's not in document form as a living document concept, it's an opportunity to really leverage more out of the CRM and really get the salespeople to drive more value as a result.
How many of you experts advise companies to have their sales reps, or how many sales managers, just thinking, have their sales reps actually present their plans to the sales manager in a presentation format, and do the other reps sit around the table and learn from each other?
Yeah, I'm completely on board with that and do that with clients. So, in my book, Hire Right, Higher Profits, I introduced this concept of looking at salespeople as a revenue investment. Where that book leaves you off is where they've been onboarded. But when I look at each salesperson on a team, let's say you have 6 salespeople, each one of them represents a revenue investment the company has made. So instead of thinking of it as a management team, I said think of yourselves as the investor group, because the company is funding that business. And the purpose of the plan from the sales perspective is to convince me, to give me confidence that I'm going to see a return on the investment that I'm making in your business. So that's the tenor that we put around that planning exercise. You've got to sell the investor team that we're going to get to that number.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Did the rest of you have salespeople present to their peers?
Yeah, I would say that's a great practice to do. And one of the reasons I found is that there's so many different kinds of reps. That some people they think more into marketing, it's a little more tactical, and so as they present their plans, they're going to learn a lot more from each other and actually advance the whole skill of the team than if you have sort of reps. If you're doing it all in one-on-ones where it's the manager and individual reps, it's much harder for them to learn from each other. And then you just don't build up the team knowledge nearly as quickly.
Well, with this caveat, as long as the groups are not too large, because then it can be a very long, over drawn out process. So and also having more senior people maximizing their time, but also getting in front of the newer folks too.
Yeah. One of the things that reminds me, I used to be famous or infamous amongst my sales teams over the years, but I was always a believer, way back before, video was as easy and as cool as it is today. I would always ask them to present, and sometimes, Lori, to your point, we might break it down into regions or divisions or something that were smaller team work units. But I think there's something to be said. If a salesperson knows they're going to present to their peers in addition to their management team, and we're going to put it on video, because I use that as a secondary opportunity to go back and critique and help the individual in how they communicate, how they present, just as an additional tool. And I can tell you from my own experience, I did this for a lot of years. The reps would spend all night, if they had to, the night before. They took it much more seriously because they knew not only are they going to present to their peers, but they're going to be on video as a recording. So I agree. I think it really adds some intensity to their preparation and to their focus on what they're going to talk about.
That's a brilliant concept, because you're right. Presentation skills are transferable. So when they're presenting the plan, you're also getting a look to see how well they would communicate a solution in a formal presentation environment.
Absolutely. And the other fun thing that for me is it's very rare that a rep that goes through that level of intensity and nervousness and all of those things is going to leave that and then forget all of their plan and what they committed to a week or two or even a month on the road. It's on record, and they really intensely learn what they're going to talk about.
That's very powerful. It also forms commitment when you put pen to paper. I guess one of the other things, and again looking to the group, how many of you use standardized templates or have clients that you recommend using a standardized template for doing the analysis, the thinking, and the actual plan presentation?
I use a standard set of tools. I wouldn't say template, but in order to speak to specific points or specific ways that they're going to do things, there are some tools that I introduce, but not per se a template. I guess if you combine those things, you can call it a template. Just haven't thought of it that way.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of providing salespeople with a template just in the interest of time. If you say, here's a blank sheet of paper, now go figure out how to communicate your plan to us, they're going to spend hours wrapped around the axle trying to figure out what format to put it in.
Yeah.
Well, we know what we're looking for, so let's give them the structure, just like an RFP, right? You give them a structure and say, this is what we're looking for you to address.
Yeah.
You just listening to this, the other thing that I struggle with, and I don't have an answer, so I'm hoping all of you can, is in this process of planning and inspecting all of this activity, when is it appropriate, and when do you manage that sales team and manage how and what they're doing, and when do you move into a coaching role? Do you do them both at the same time, or is there one function and later at a different setting do you move into coaching?
I tend to separate the two. I sort of tell them that there is, your role as a manager, and we can get into that later, how I define it. And then once that is completed, then at a separate time, they do their coaching. Because in a sense, the managing part sets the expectation, and the coaching part is helping them deliver to those expectations. And to some degree, there's probably, from my point of view, some merit to separating those two, even if it's a question of a day.
Absolutely separate. I concur, because they're different things that you're doing.
We call it switching hats, but one of the things I do believe in for sales leaders is what I call a coaching mindset, which even when you're setting expectations or being firm with someone, use of effective questions is a good approach to take to get people to understand and to think. And that's, coaching mindset. Coaching could be applied when you're managing, but it is a different skill set, it's a different tone. But some of the skills you get from coaching can certainly be applied to any management discussion.
Okay. What are some of the metrics? I know, again, there's different industries and different sizes of organization, but maybe if you wouldn't, each of you maybe mind sharing a few of what you feel are those key metrics that if you're managing a sales team, you have to be looking at, as you go either on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, whatever? What are some of the key metrics that you think every sales manager should be looking at as they build out this plan?
So coming from the execution side, I think I encourage people to look at metrics that are what I call leading indicators. You know, sales types are wound to think about revenue, but by the time you get that number, it's a lagging indicator. You can analyze it, you can dissect it, but it's done. You can maybe take lessons into the next sale, but you can't change the outcome. So I like to look at metrics that lead to that outcome. So I like to look early in the process. What's their ability to convert from one stage to the next? And it may vary from company to company and group to group, but my favorite is what does it take for them to get in front of a real qualified prospect? How many of those initial meetings can they convert into a true discovery process that leads to proposal? How many of those discovery can they convert to proposal? How many proposals can they convert to sales? Because that allows me then as a coach to look at subsets of those and get incremental gain and put a focus on specific things as opposed to trying to change the big picture. And I can also then focus on those things that are going to change the outcome, because if just loosely speaking, if my conversion ratio is 8 qualified prospects to 1 close, if all of a sudden I'm coming in at 6 or 7 over a given period of time, the reality is I'm not going to make my 1 sale. So it's easier to fix that front end than to panic at the back end.
Who else has something to add to that?
You know, what I would say on metrics is that there's some metrics that you can look at on a daily or weekly basis, you know, activity levels, pipeline, you know, et cetera. And on those, one of the things that we find is really important is just, you know, engaged pipeline. How much of the opportunities in your pipeline are with prospects that are really actually having those discussions with you versus, you know, you see those deals that sit in the pipeline forever and they're never really doing anything. But then I think especially, you know, is the idea of planning for the year and looking towards next year. It is those conversion metrics and things like, you know, win-loss ratios over time that are really useful to actually take some time and think about and analyze. And one of the things we see is that there are real differences on teams. You know, some people just actually have better win ratios. And the question is, you know, what are they doing differently and how do we capture that and spread that knowledge? Or, you know, the things like length of sales cycle. And, you know, obviously how long a deal is around has a huge impact on if it's going to close or not. And what we see again and again is, you know, the deals that close go quickly and the deals that aren't going to close just they stall out and then they sit in the pipeline. And are there things that you need to be doing to help people either address those and quickly or get rid of them so they can focus on the deals they can close? And so I think if you're looking at planning for next year, it is the slower metrics that's a great time at the end of the year to take a seat back and really think about what is the long-term implications of the business you're trying to run.
I think to Dan's point, one of the simplest things that managers can do is actually give their people permission to take things out of the pipeline.
Just throwing in a different perspective, I do a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry, and some of the key metrics that they look at, it's not about a pipeline, it's really about, are you targeting the right physicians? How frequently are you seeing them? And where you're focusing your resources, whether it be education, conferences. So we look at what we call target, focus, and frequency, and reach as well, which again is a different perspective, but it's one that certainly is trackable. Certainly if you have a CRM, you can track your frequency, your planned frequency, and again, how much time you're spending on the right physicians who are going to drive your business.
And there's a vantage point that I also take. So those are great when we're looking at the individual contributors. But then when I look at a sales manager scorecard and you look at what that annual revenue budget that's been put in place, it's based on being fully staffed. Mm-hmm. And so if the sales manager isn't keeping a healthy pipeline of candidates, just like we're talking about the salespeople having pipelines of deals to come, if they don't have a pipeline of candidates, we know there's always going to be some turnover on the team. Open seats means we're either going to make a bad decision or we don't have enough firepower to get to that annual number. So one of the things that I encourage executives to look at is the pipeline of candidates, and then once salespeople are onboarded, looking at different, I call them profitability hurdles. So the amount of time it takes for the salesperson to bring in their first deal, when they bring in enough revenue to cover their monthly salary, when they bring in enough revenue to cover their monthly cost, and then looking at aggregate timelines, amount of time it takes for all of the salary that's been paid to be covered by the revenue that's been produced. And then same concept, looking at total cost incurred and looking for ways to reduce the timelines to reach those milestones.
Lee, actually, you tweak something.
Great point.
Just to, if you look at sales manager, we were talking a lot about sales individual planning for reps. One of the biggest areas that, if I can share with who's on here, one of the biggest areas managers fail to plan on is their most important resource, which is their time. And we all know, and we all conceptually agree that coaching is the most important activity to drive sales performance. Yet managers do not build an annual plan of how much time they plan to spend with each rep, when they plan to spend it, and actually track that. And we've built that in for some companies who are very serious about that and start measuring how much time, where they're spending time. But a lot of that requires thinking up front. Otherwise, coaching becomes one of those rocks that you put in at the end of the day after you've done all your to-dos. And from a manager's perspective, if you're a frontline manager or if you're managing a frontline manager, that's a great question to ask is how much time are you spending in the field next year? And who are you spending it with and why? And what are you trying to do with each?
Yep.
So I think that's an area that's really...
It becomes very reactive.
Yeah, it becomes, oh, I got a meeting, I have to cancel my time out in the field, as opposed to this is the driver of performance, me actually coaching my salespeople, yet it fails to get covered anywhere or anyone's held accountable to that. And I think that's one of the biggest misses companies have in their planning process, or managers do, but there's a gap there.
I find when I ask most sales managers if they have a coaching plan for their individual reps, they don't. It's very ad hoc. Maybe it's just the type of companies I deal with, but very few have I met when I ask them, do you have a coaching plan for individual reps? And by far, no.
How do you start that, Tibor?
I'm sorry?
How do you begin that? What are the core pieces? If someone says, hey, I'm one of those managers, I don't have that, what's maybe one or two key pieces they could look at starting to get going on?
So again, I try and take a look. I try and get them to look at the process, or shall we call it their sales flow, because I think process gets people running for the hills. As I say, we talked about some of the conversion rates and so on. Those are ultimately going to be driven by the activity, their ability to do those activities. So I try and look at what I see, the strengths and the weaknesses of each individual rep, and how they're executing the process, and then align the plan with that. And what that gives my clients an opportunity to do is to have a standardized process, so it's not ad hoc all over the place, but it's not cookie cutter as much as each rep's coaching plan reflects their ability at different stages of that process. So if Steve's the great prospector, but he's not a good negotiator, I would tailor it to that. If I was a lousy prospector, but I could go through the discovery process quickly and then fall down a proposal, I could, as a manager, go to that. So I tend to use the process as the central tool for almost everything in sales.
If I can jump in here, because we work with managers on coaching and what I call building a coaching journey. And really, if you want to take a sort of a altruistic coaching approach, it's really what is the rep committed to working on to improve their performance. And we really try to narrow down the focus of that and say, over the next 6 months, if there's one skill that will have an impact on your overall performance that you're committed to working on, that sort of frames the outline for your coaching journey, your coaching plan. And we have, traditionally managers would develop that. We have sales reps decide what they're going to focus on and how they're going to get there, because it forms commitment to the plan. One of the biggest challenges in coaching is the manager driving that process, saying, okay, you should work on X or you should work on Y, as opposed to the rep saying, hey, I'm committed to working on X, and this is how I'm going to get there. So it's a conversation. It's a great time at the beginning of the year to start that off with each rep. And if, as a manager, you're able to impact one key area of the sales rep's performance, I think you've done a great job as a coach.
And the idea of putting it in the calendar, as was mentioned a little earlier, I think is the way to go, because we know that all the studies are indicating that sales leaders are not making enough time to coach reps. And I think of it kind of like planning, in that it's a plan, and they don't understand investing that time up front. And if they would do the same with coaching, those that do plan, that do go through a process, see the benefit over time. But if you're not used to doing it, it's something that you learn the hard way sometimes, and then sometimes you see it with other people demonstrating it well, and it works a lot better.
So if I could throw out a question to the others, how frequently do you recommend to your clients that their frontline managers coach their individual reps? I'll throw mine out. I recommend weekly at least.
Okay, it depends, I guess, how you define coaching, right? If it's a telephone call or if it's actually observational, being in the field.
I think, so I'm talking a specific dedicated coaching time. That doesn't preclude going on ride-alongs and time in the field and other things like listening to their plans and so on. But once you've developed that coaching plan for your rep, so I think all those other things lend to it. Your pipeline reviews, your opportunity reviews, they all contribute to it. But then there is that time when you sit down for formal coaching.
When I speak to coaching, I frame it around observational and being out in the field with the rep. Certainly there's other coaching opportunities, but the studies show that I believe it's 3 to 7 to 9 hours a month of pure coaching time is where you optimize your coaching impact.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would say 5 to 6 hours, but in fact most sales leaders spend, I think, an hour. So there's a big gap.
Yeah.
Gig, let me ask you this, because some of the questions have come in. Please, from the audience perspective, don't hesitate to ask the questions. They're very helpful for us to get some specific questions answered. One of the things I think we could all agree on is there's been a lot of change in the sales profession over the last year or two, and at the same time, nothing's changed, right? I don't want to get this into a social selling conversation, but the bottom line is there are changes in our culture, in our society, in how buyers are reacting their resources, the seller and sales approach. One of the questions that came in, are there any new metrics that maybe have emerged over the last year or so that maybe we haven't even thought of or didn't even know to measure before or didn't need to measure before that we should now be considering? Dan, what about you? You're obviously in that business. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I said before, the metrics that we find are the most important are really just signs of life on the prospect side. And so there's tools out there that are going to look at things like, your web traffic, and they're going to say, hey, these are people that are evaluating your product, and we're seeing more and more employees of that company coming to your website. And that's a really good sign that they're actually looking at you as opposed to just, giving you lip service. I think some of the social things you hear about, Twitter and stuff like that, I'm not sure those are as indicative when it gets down to a real deal and somebody buying something. But I do think that web traffic, these tools that track, are they opening your emails? There's a lot of things out there that sales teams are not using that are actually, I think pretty cheap and pretty useful to give you a much better view of what's really happening with your prospects and in the deals that you're counting on.
Sure. Lee, what about you? I mean, are there some new things that have emerged over the last year or two that you're starting to say, we really better start watching these things?
There's a question, it's not a new question, but the answers are different. And that's part of those one-on-one sessions that a manager has with a salesperson, which is, what did you do this week to make yourself more effective selling next week? And the answers to those questions have evolved because of all those things that you mentioned earlier, from social selling to how buyers are making decisions, understanding how the competitors are positioning against them, all those kinds of things. And it's amazing. You'll catch a salesperson flat-footed once, maybe twice with that question, but never again. So the idea is that you're trying to ingrain that continuous self-improvement part into the sales team, and by asking that question, you're ensuring that they're staying current with their skills.
How about you, Lori? What do you think? Anything new that's emerged that you think, wow, I didn't even know we should be tracking that?
What I'm seeing are tools now that are going to be helping us evolve, such as recording video and having it be able to sense and tell and rate how a rep is doing. So I give my value proposition or my messaging over the video, and it's actually pulling out a rating as to how I'm doing, how much empathy and genuineness and things like that. That's very interesting to me, as well as some of the assessment tools that are evolving to see culture fit. So I think there are a lot of interesting things that we're going to be seeing in the next year.
I can add something. I think one of the challenges is there's far too much data out there. And when you have data, people tend to lose time and focus on it, as opposed to really saying, what are our key success factors, and let's measure those. I think when you get data overwhelm, your salespeople are not spending time where they should. So I think if companies want to get smart, the first question they have to ask themselves, as opposed to what are we not looking at, is what's going to drive our business, and can we measure that, and how can we measure it? And I think, if it's 3 factors or 4 factors, I don't think you want to be measuring 20 or 30 factors. Otherwise, you get a mixed read and you're not really focused on what's critical. So I think with big data and all this stuff, what it does is it helps to defocus companies as opposed to focus them.
Yeah, I just
don't you think people are overwhelmed? Go ahead, Dan. I was just going to say, don't you see that sales leaders as well as reps are feeling overwhelmed by all of this data and all these tools?
Or baffled.
Yeah, I think baffled. The thing we see a lot is it's like the drunk looking for his car keys under the street light. They have all this data they can get out of Salesforce. Doesn't really tell them anything, but they're supposed to look at it because their boss might cold call them and say, hey, I noticed that, blah, 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 blah has changed. And so they become this sort of weird data analyst where they're trying to figure out, from the data just what's going on, but it's never going to tell them what they need to know to actually make more deals. I mean, I think what Tibor said earlier is totally right, which is people that say the only metric that matters is the revenue and the deal. All those leading indicators they could actually be looking at to grow their revenue. They're just, they're watching from the sidelines. They're not helping drive the business when they look at the wrong metrics.
And it leads to an interesting point, because not only is there so much data and reporting coming into sales organizations, but companies overall in all the different departments are getting visibility that they never had before. And a common sales mistake when there's a business review is they come in with more data for the client rather than synthesizing the data, interpreting the data, and coming in with recommendations. And that's so important for salespeople to do today as part of building value in a relationship.
Yeah, guys, let me just share. I smile because I didn't know that the term big data would even come up during the session, but I have to tell you, I am not a data guy at all. I'm a sales guy, and I've always kind of avoided that digging down into intimate details because it'll cloud my mind. But as a sales guy, but I have to tell you, if you think you're befuddled and bewildered and buried now in data, you are going to not even be able to breathe in the next few years, because the era of big data is here. In fact, I just wrote a post, and I want to get to something that Lee had mentioned earlier on at the end of this, is that I wrote a post and I talked about maybe your next sales hire shouldn't even be a salesperson. You might want to think about adding a data analyst, a sales data analyst to your team, because the data in the new world of natural language interfaces and the whole IBM Watson environment and Tableau and all of these new companies, they are making significant impact in companies' results by taking data at a level we've never seen before, down to details that we never even knew we could have asked the questions about, whether it's for our existing customers or our prospects. But my question maybe, and if you guys have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it from a data standpoint. I think it's dangerous to think that your existing sales team or your sales management are going to serve the role as a data analyst. But I'm convinced, after spending the last 3 months immersed into this topic in big data as it relates to sales, that someone's got to be able to be digging into this, because if not, your competitors are going to have a substantial advantage. Any thoughts? Am I just going crazy because I've spent too much time in the analytics of big data?
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny. It is funny you say that because if you're a Major League Baseball fan and look at the evolution that's taken place there, was driven by the Oakland A's with Moneyball, and the GMs that are getting hired today are these Ivy League grads, not baseball experts, but people that know how to get underneath the data, because it's been proven that they can make better baseball decisions through data. And I think it's the same thing you're going to see with sales teams, as you're going to see an important right-hand person for sales leaders be that analyst that you're describing. I could see it as a hybrid almost between sales and marketing, with a task of getting underneath the data to help the salespeople focus on the areas where they should be to win more deals.
I think in the end it comes down to what they do with that data. You know, you mentioned you're doing a piece. I'm in the midst of writing a piece. You know, information is currency, knowledge is power. And so there is a lot of information and so on. But I think in addition to analysis, what this role could really do is synthesize and give things to the salespeople that they can actually use to demonstrate knowledge to the prospect.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't need more information. We need insight.
Well, some people think
that's
we need more.
that's what's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I would jump in, since this is kind of, you know, a lot about what Enkata does, but, you know, I'm talking about the product. But, you know, I think you are seeing this thing where there's more and more data available, and that's going to just increase for ages, right? I mean, the amount of data that we pull is just crazy. But it is the insight, which is, you know, you're right, Miles, salespeople aren't data scientists. They're not going to dig into it. Somebody has to, or something, because actually if you look at, there's predictive analytics is a huge investment area right now for venture capitalists, because what they're saying is, how do you use data to make people smarter, and how do you prioritize that data and put it to them where they can consume it, and that's, I think, where you're going to see, like in 5 years, is the whole difference is going to be that instead of having Salesforce as this flat dashboard that has a bunch of things you can click on, you're going to have prioritized actions. You know, lead scoring telling you who to call first, opportunity scoring you telling you which opportunities need attention now, what kind of attention. All that stuff is being built now, and I think you're going to see it coming out in the near future.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just concerned that a lot of us, myself included, up until fairly recently, hear big data, or hear data analyst, or hear predictive analytics, or cognitive learning, and my eyes got glass, and I go, wait a minute, where's my next customer to go talk to, right? But it is going to be a significant impact, and again, I don't think you necessarily have to change the day-by-day measuring and coaching of your reps, but someone in your sales organization has to at least have access to the tools to dig into and use that data. What I wanted to get to, and it's really, I think, an interesting point. I'm really curious for this, because all of you have different areas of expertise or different industries that you've served in and that you currently coach with and consult with. Let me start, Lee, with you. Every sales organization, hopefully, that's listening today, has a need and plans to hire in 2015. I hope that's the case, which means there's growth and activity and success. What should they be looking for, and how is that hiring profile, or has it changed, first of all, and if it is, what has changed that I should now be looking for as I build that pipeline that you had mentioned earlier of new people coming into my team?
Yeah, and so a first step, and maybe you do it during this business planning exercise, because if the corporate strategy is going to change, that impacts several things. It impacts who you're going to hire for the role, impacts how you're going to get them up to speed to sell for the company, and it could impact how you're going to pay them. And sometimes those things get forgotten in all this. You come up with these wonderful strategic plans, and then it dawns on someone, unfortunately, usually too late, you know, this comp plan is not reinforcing the behaviors that we want from our sales team. Or, gee, you know, we don't have the right horses to execute this particular strategy. And so one of the things as part of this whole planning exercise is taking a step back and looking at what I call performance factors of a particular sales role. What is it that causes salespeople to succeed in that role? What causes them to fail? And then you put together what I call a performance factor portfolio, and you put together an evaluation program to contrast candidates with those performance factors. So what it takes to be successful in that role does evolve over time, and you do need to come back and look at that periodically and make adjustments in who you're bringing onto your team to accommodate for that.
Any other thoughts from the rest of you guys?
I use psychometric profiles, and I think it may be similar. That there's some key factors that I don't think change with salespeople over time, such as their ability to self-manage, their ability to work independently. So some of those factors we can actually track against a large population and of comparators and see who successful people are. I encourage sales managers to actually use those profiles over time and actually grade them against performance, seeing what factors are make an impact from low performers and high performers. One of the best ways to learn is contrasting performance of your top and your bottom and seeing what factors or what range within the profile as a scientific method differ, and using that as part of your hiring criteria. Part, not the whole part, but part of it.
Yeah, I still run into sales leaders that hire by gut, and I've never been better than 50% at that. I don't know about anybody else. I think that's about as good as you can get, but maybe not. Maybe other people have had more luck with that. But utilizing an assessment tool of some type is clearly an important thing to think about and put into place.
And I'll be the odd man out on this. I have a lot of issues with assessment tools. I'm not a fan of any of them. And my issue isn't the science, it's the reliance that managers have on these tools. And my position's always been that every sales role in every company is unique. So how can an independent third-party tool know all of what it takes to be successful in that specific role in that environment? I think it's a wonderful data point, but I find sales leaders and executives are way too reliant on those tools and don't rely on putting together the right interview program, evaluation techniques to see the candidates in action so that they make an informed decision.
Yeah,
I'll jump in with Lee on that one. I actually used to work at an assessment company, and assessments are tough. If you're trying to build a sales organization, you're not sure what you're looking for. I think Lee's approach is right, and I'll just tell one interesting story, which is Google. Is a huge data-driven company, and they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars trying to figure out an assessment profile to hire people that they knew would be successful. And they basically, their Laszlo Bach, who's their VP of HR, came out in an interview earlier this year and said, they actually couldn't find, with all the time they put into it, they could not find indicators that were going to predict success for them. And they were rethinking their approach. But the assessment things, they actually backed off on substantially from what they had been doing.
And that's after spending millions of dollars to investigate. A lot of companies just buy it off the shelf and say, here we go, and we're going to rely on it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they had that whole thing about you had to go to one of 50 schools, and they wouldn't hire you unless you'd gone to, one of their top schools. And
wow.
They had these weird things about if you had a pet or if you were the president of a club. And we actually have the article on our blog, and people can email me, and I can send them more about it. But what they said is that all the things they thought were going to be predictive of success, it turned out actually part of the punchline is back to the coaching. Part of the punchline was it turns out actually who your manager is a big predictor of success. If you have a manager who's really good and knows how to coach you and puts the time in, you're going to be successful. And if your manager blows you off and doesn't know how to manage you, it doesn't matter if you went to, Stanford and were perfect SAT scores and all that. So one of the things he said in the interview is they're doubling down on developing the first-line managers to make sure that those
Brilliant.
people are building success.
Well, it's building the foundation for success, right? And the foundation is your frontline managers. Just getting back, Lee, I agree with you. You certainly want to build a profile of the right candidate based on your experience. If you're starting out, then maybe you don't have that. But if you're an existing organization, you've got a database of people who you can look at in terms of who's been successful in your organization, assuming that things carry on the same. But you can continually validate your tool. And I'm not saying you're right. If you're completely reliant on the tool, you're making a mistake. The tool sometimes helps you flag things that even great interviewers miss.
Absolutely.
So to me, it's like an insurance policy. Hey, did we miss anything? If we have, let's go look a little deeper because no one opens up their kimono in an interview. So it has a purpose, I think, but you're right. If organizations are relying on that as a key factor, they're making a big mistake.
Well, they use it as a crutch, and what you describe is exactly the way I would hope they would use as additional data points to really see if they have a match between the candidate and the role. It's just used too often as a crutch and say, well, we'll put them through interviews and then we'll see whatever the assessment says, we'll go with that.
Right, and that's wrong, right? Because then you don't need to do interviews.
Correct, and that's exactly what I tell clients. If you're going to take that approach, well, forget the interview process. Those that pass the test, you hire, and those that don't, you don't.
Yeah, you can actually automate it. The offer gets sent out automatically based on right. So, but I think there are some merits, and and again, it's where it's used and how it's used, and you know what the best assessment tool is?
Your brain.
I thought you were going to say Tibor.
Actually, but besides the four of you, it's actually the one that you understand, because most people don't understand the assessment tools they're using. So if you don't know how to interpret, how do you make decisions off of it? And I don't touch one over the other, but a couple things. One is ongoing validation of what your top performers look like based on actual performance, and managers understanding what they're actually looking at when they're looking at one of those.
Tibor, you've been kind of trying to reach out through the camera a couple times on this topic. What's your thought?
No, I tend to agree. I mean, I like the way Lee started off. I don't think you're the odd man out. I'm somewhat suspect of assessments only because I remember when I was given them, I could more or less look at them and to some degree manipulate them. So, if I wanted to be a hunter that day, that's what I'd show. And if I wanted to be a farmer that day, because that's a job I wanted, I'm going to make it read that as well. I also find that the tail end of it, excuse the expression, it's very much a CYA exercise. So so I think the money that companies put into the assessments, and I'm not saying it's a black and white. I think, as Steve says, there are some aspects to it, but I think some of the money should be redirected to teaching their people how to interview, having a constructive interview process. So if I'm interviewing 6 people, I'm comparing apples to apples or matzah to matzah or whatever the case might be. So I think where it doesn't eliminate the subjectivity that people pretend that it does. And I think that if we took some of the resources and taught people how to interview, introduce the proper process, the combination of the two can help you. I'll just add one other comment to what Lee said earlier in terms of the performance factors. I think one of the things that organizations aren't doing well is really understanding why they're winning deals, why they're losing deals, or why some deals just don't come out at the other end of the pipeline. And I think if you looked at that on a simple basis and combined that with the assessments, I think you'd have something that truly is bigger than the sum of the parts, as they say.
Excellent. Yeah, as I look at the time, it's amazing. This hour is almost up. We've got about 7-8 minutes left in the broadcast. Let me just take this chance. Some of the questions, I had a great question that came in from Andy about, as a CEO, what am I supposed to be managing my sales leaders on? And maybe kind of as we start to wind down, maybe a 30-second answer from all of you, if you want. What would you recommend if I'm a CEO? I've got a team of sales managers or VP of sales and some district managers. What should I, as the CEO, be looking to measure of them?
So as a CEO, I'm not sure. I mean, assuming it was a layered organization, the way you describe it, Miles, as a CEO, I'm not sure I'd be looking that far down the pipe. I'd be looking to manage my VP of sales, my director of sales, people who have contribution to the revenue process, be that manufacturing, marketing, and so on. What I would hope for is that the key messages and objectives cascade down from that layer to the next. But I'd be suspect of a CEO that was doing that for their managers and frontline reps, but I would hold them accountable for the message and the direction and the way that cascades down through the organization.
Stephen, how about you?
Things. One, are they hiring the right people? So we're looking at your sales leader. 2, are they developing their people effectively? And 3, are they retaining their top performers?
That's a good one. Lori, any thoughts on that topic?
Oh, I was just thinking about the CEO needs to be setting that vision and being really sales leader, whoever's running that team, understands what the goal and the vision for the company is. And I think that those differentiators that they can convey in their vision is what is going to help propel them to help create their message. So, I think they should focus on that first and foremost.
Okay. Lee, how about you?
Yeah, and we touched upon this earlier. I mean, you have a sales manager scorecard on looking at fill rate for seats, best practices in sales management. We know that you should be looking to upgrade the bottom 20%. So are you taking action on the bottom 20% of the team, or are you letting that languish in our business, because obviously that hurts. It hurts profitability. I'm looking at things like how long it takes for those hurdles, like I mentioned earlier, for a salesperson to sell their first deal. I'm looking at average pipeline size of the people that we bring in, etc.
Okay. How about you, Dan?
So I think, one of the key things is, you have this top line revenue target, and then the sales leadership has to have the plan in terms of headcount and resources needed to get there. And, the CEO shouldn't be getting too deep into the thing about, well, how many calls and emails are being sent. What they should be doing is saying, do you have a rational plan for how you're getting to that number? And are you telling the rest of the organization what you need from them? And is the rest of the organization responding? I mean, I would look at it almost sales and marketing very tightly tied together in that, which is, what is that team doing to get resources in and productivity out of the backside?
Okay. Excellent. Guys, as we wrap up, maybe just really quickly, because there's several questions I'd like to pursue further or maybe explore with one of the panelists. Let's start, Lee, with you. Maybe just what's the best way to reach you? Website or email? Tell us what the best way is for our listeners to get you.
Yep, best way is to go to my website, salesarchitects, and that's plural.com, salesarchitects.com.
All right. Lori, how about you?
Well, since I didn't have my name up the whole time, it's scoremoresales.com and scoremoresales on most social platforms.
Perfect. Stephen?
Website, starresults.com, and you've got all my information there. LinkedIn's a good place to find me.
And Tibor?
Call Stephen. No.
I'll pass on every referral.
The best to reach me, I guess, is either through the website, sellbetter.ca, or the phone number that should be showing by my name. And LinkedIn, as Stephen said.
Nice.
There we go. Excellent. And with that, Dan, we've got a special opportunity that's at the bottom of the screen for everyone watching live. There's an opportunity to grab a new ebook that you guys have. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just quickly, we looked at different things that sales leaders are trying to do to increase effectiveness of the organization. We pulled together a white paper on it, and really just talking to lots of different people and lots of different companies about what are the things that you can do to get more out of your sales team. Consolidate it, put it together, free download. Come by the Enkata website, and you'll see the offers there as well.
Absolutely. So it's and I think that's the kind of thing that'll help. It's just in sales management, we all need help. We all need references. We all need the ability to kind of gather some thoughts when we're going through all of our day-to-day activities, especially in these times when we're trying to squeeze every last opportunity out of it. So with that, again, please note the link on the bottom. If you just go to bit.ly/Enkata, ENKATA4, you'll be able to download that free ebook as well about sales effectiveness in the sales position. So with that, again, thank you to the team at Enkata for their help. Please take a look at their site. They are doing an excellent job in providing some great resources to sales leaders across North America and some great opportunities. And as you've heard today, Dan and the team are very engaged in what we're doing on the salesperson productivity side as well as the management side. And they've got some really great things to offer. So I'd encourage you to take a look at their site as well. To Lee, Salz, stay warm up there. Lori, I hope you don't get hit too bad with this snowstorm. Stephen and Tibor, Thanks for sending this cold, miserable, windy weather.
It came from Alaska. It came from Alaska. We didn't
Send
even charge
heat.
any duty.
Always
It came
blame
from
Canada for these things, or it just that's the way.
All I know is it's a snow from Canada because I looked out and there was a process involved of getting snow rather than a process. So I knew that there was Canadian in there somewhere.
Okay.
Imagine how much worse it would have been if we didn't process it.
There we go. Dan, any last words from you as we wrap this one up?
No, but just thank you everyone very much. I think this is a great session, and I appreciate everyone putting their time and effort into it and really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. So for all of you, thank you for participating. And all of you listeners, thank you for your questions. You will get follow-up. You'll get some reminders after the event is over as well. So thank you for that, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Enkata broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you.